If you've got Hashimoto's, what you eat absolutely matters to your thyroid health. Don't let anyone tell you differently. But here's the problem. There's a lot of obsession over certain foods, gluten, dairy, soy, other things, and there's ideas why these might be a problem. No one's really looking at the things that do matter, that are based upon strong evidence. I'm going to show you 10 common foods most people think are healthy, but there's good evidence they could be sabotaging your thyroid. Trust me, you're probably eating a few of these. My name is Dr. Christianson. I am a board-certified naturopathic endocrinologist with 30 years focus of treating thyroid disease naturally. So here's the problem. We have a sense that diet can help the thyroid, and it can. The difficulty is that many of the guidelines or suggestions you hear are not really based upon current evidence. They're simply based upon the telephone game. So Joe said something, Sally heard it, Sally repeated it, John heard it, John repeated it. That's what 99% of what you hear for thyroid dietary advice, that's all it is. And the more people have heard the same things over and over again, the more they think that it's got to be true. But the tough part is gluten-free diets, autoimmune paleo diets, keto diets. There's theories why they might work, but they've been studied and they've been shown either not to help at all or to actually make things worse. And many can try approaches like this, find they don't work, and assume diet cannot help. Or doctors hear about experts saying that, supposed experts saying that, and then the doctors look at research and say, oh, that's just not true. And so they assume that, no, diet doesn't help. But there's good evidence that diet can. There's strong evidence for that. In fact, one study showed that 78% of people who had had chronic hypothyroidism, secondary to Hashimoto's, could fully reverse it in 3 months only by doing dietary change and only one dietary intervention. This is one of many studies showing that diet can help, but it wasn't a gluten-free diet and it wasn't an autoimmune paleo diet. So the biggest single factor that I'm going to talk about is going to be iodine. Not the only one, but the biggest one by far. And here's why. With Hashimoto's, we're talking about an autoimmune disease. And a lot of what we know about it correlates with thyroid antibodies. Not exclusively. There's about half of those with Hashimoto's who do not have measurable thyroid antibodies. I know, I'll talk more about that too. But the antibodies we measure are anti-thyroglobulin and anti-thyroid peroxidase. So what are these? What do they do? So thyroid peroxidase, that is an enzyme. And it is the enzyme that makes iodine from a harmless form into an active form. Thyroglobulin is where the iodine ends up getting stored. So these are iodine processing compounds. That's what they do. And when our personal iodine intake is outside of the window that we tolerate, our immune system attacks the iodine processing compounds. It's just that simple. And we've got so many data points supporting this. In fact, it was about 1924 when the U.S. fortified its salt with iodine. Not nationally, it was a regional thing actually, but in the following decades, the rate of autoimmune thyroid disease in adult women, it went up 26-fold. Not percent, 26 times more common. Okay, so given that, let's jump in. I'll talk about some of the 10 foods that can be a big problem that you might not be thinking about. First one, gluten-free breads. Yeah, I said that. Here's the thing. It's not gluten-free. It's not that you need to have gluten, but the problem is that many breads are processed with iodized dough conditioners. This is also true for gluten-free breads. What's your healthy iodine intake? If you're an adult, you're trying to keep your thyroid stable, you got a rather large range, but it's on the lower end. So about 20 to 200 micrograms is really healthy. If you're trying to correct a thyroid problem, short term, you want to be on the lower side, below about 100 micrograms. So those are the numbers we're going to think about. Now, gluten-free breads with iodized dough conditioners, they can clock in at 400, 500, 600 micrograms per serving. So you're trying to avoid gluten, which is totally helpful for some people, but while you're doing that, you can overload your thyroid with iodine, and that worsens the autoimmunity. Greek yogurt, non-fat Greek yogurt. Super popular food, good source of protein, lots of calcium. Here's the problem. Many dairy sources have iodine as a contaminant because of its use as a teat sanitizer. I grew up on a farm. I've seen this stuff happen firsthand. You've got little rubber suction cups that fit on the udder and that pulls the milk out. There's also some skin irritation. There's some abrasion that takes place from the milking process. And to prevent there from being mastitis, an infection on the udder, there's sanitizers that are used. and nearly all are iodine-based. The amounts of iodine that gets in is enough to make a difference and to build up in milk compounds. Next to think about is protein powders, especially whey protein powders. Now, many of these you'll find use different texturizers, and carrageenan is a big one. This is also a inflammatory type of a sea vegetable, which can also be a source of hidden iodine. And then also as a dairy food, we can have about 1 to 2 parts per million of iodine in whey protein. Whey protein is great for those free of thyroid disease, good evidence around that. But the extra iodine can be an issue. That 1 to 2 parts per million, when you add that up to a 30 to 60 gram serving, now you're talking about a lot. Next up would be egg yolks, not the whites, but the yolks. And here's the thing, I love egg yolks. They're really good foods nutritionally. And when you're outside of fixing a thyroid problem, outside of what I call that reset stage, and now you're stable, you're doing maintenance, eggs are nice things to include. But the drawback is their iodine intake varies so much, some can have more than 200 micrograms per yolk. Generally, if you're doing organic free-range eggs, you're going to stay more like about 60 to 100 micrograms, and that's reasonable for that maintenance stage. Probably worth avoiding still for that reset stage, but that's the issue there. We think about salmon as a classic health food too. There's good evidence that most Atlantic salmon has pretty high amounts of PCBs, polychlorobiphenyls. There's data saying that this can be a driver of inflammatory thyroid reactions. And then also this is one of those moderate sources of iodine. I think about iodine content of foods as a green light, yellow light, or red light range. Green light is consistently below about 10 micrograms. Yellow light is 10 to 50, pretty predictably so. Red light is either sometimes it's got a lot or it always has well over 50 micrograms per serving. And if you want to know how foods break down, in the description, I'm going to put a link where you can get a free download. That is my green light, yellow light, red light list food. That's a tongue twister. From the Thyroid Reset Diet book. So take a peek in the descriptions. I'll mention that again in a bit. Other thing to think about for common foods, butter. Now, there was one study done, it was in Croatia, and it tracked pretty large populations comparing those who had high thyroid antibodies against those who did not. And they saw some strong food patterns that were correlated with greater inflammatory levels of thyroid antibodies. One that was a strong difference was butter intake. The other was wine. So butter and wine have been shown in human studies to correlate with a greater risk of the autoimmune response. And this was evidence in this trial and also reproduced in others as well. Next up would be sea vegetables. Now, of course, they're just whopping sources of iodine. Think about those numbers I talked about. Most types of sea vegetables per serving are 20 to 40 times above what's a safe, healthy limit for those with thyroid disease. But we can also see radioactive iodine or cadmium. There's many common contaminants there. Next year is going to be pink Himalayan salt. Now, this is talked about quite a bit as if it's this superfood, but recent data shows that it's high in microplastics. Nearly 90% of samples have high amounts of microplastics. And the iodine content, this is so weird, most products don't have fortified iodine. It's not added in after the product has been mined or produced. And so the label will say, this product does not supply iodine, an essential nutrient. The label is misleading because it's not speaking to the iodine content that's already there as a contaminant, not as an additive. So when assays are done of pink Himalayan salts, it does vary a lot from sample to sample, but many assays show that it can have upwards of 200 to 300 micrograms per day serving, and that can be higher than even iodized salts. There's a fair amount there. Now, last one's going to be surprising. Apple cider vinegar. Thyroid disease, Hashimoto's, is autoimmune disease, and other autoimmune diseases are more common with it. In fact, there's a thing called atrophic gastritis, also called thyrogastric syndrome. That's an autoimmune disease in which the immune system attacks the parietal cells in the stomach. These are the cells that make hydrochloric acid. And so consequently, if people make too little stomach acid, they can have a hard time digesting, perhaps more bloating, difficulty with proteins. And sometimes ingesting vinegar helps those symptoms. Also, hydrochloric acid pills sometimes helps those symptoms. These are common recommendations. But here's the drawback. If you're someone that has atrophic gastritis, not only are you not making your own acid well enough, but you're not making your mucin well enough. And that's what protects your esophagus and stomach from acid. And if this condition is not diagnosed or managed, there's a much higher rate of esophageal and stomach cancers. And if you ingest more acid from vinegar or acidic things or hydrochloric acid pills, you only make that risk worse. So please don't think that just because it feels better short term for digestion, that it's necessarily helpful. For about a third of those with Hashimoto's, 30 to 40%, this is a dangerous thing that raises a cancer risk. So what do you do about this? What are the high-level takeaways? Well, the main thing to know is that a diet's not better just because it's more restrictive. It's better if it's clinically shown to make a big difference. It's based upon things that are shown from solid evidence and not just by the pass-along telephone game. The nice thing is that the diets that can work best give you options in all the food categories. There's no major restriction you've got to go through, including grains, dairy, nuts and seeds, beans, legumes, animal proteins. All these food categories have healthy options. You don't have to be super restrictive. You want to be thyroid specific. So the best place to start out, the easiest, most painless change is with your salt, because you don't have to restrict or avoid salt or use icky salt. You can use really good tasting salt, but you want versions that don't have iodine as a contaminant or as an additive. Easiest thing there is get some kosher salt. It tastes great, it works really well for cooking, and it doesn't have issues with microplastics or other contaminants. So super easy thing. So if you want to learn more, check out a free download of the green light, yellow light, red light foods from the Thyroid Reset Diet. I'll have a link in the description below. You can just grab this free thing and learn more and get started in the right direction. My follow-up video will be about if these are better foods to avoid, which are better foods to focus on. So take a look at that. You might enjoy that. And please like and subscribe. If you found this helpful, please give me some feedback. I want to know more of what's useful for you. And I want to provide more good content to help you on your thyroid journey. The natural approaches can work well, but they're not all equally effective. And I want to share the best ones with you.